Okay, we're good now. So, if you recall, we are on page 17, and we're talking about what we call negelwasser. We're talking about washing our hands upon arising in the morning. So we just to summarize, we saw there's a machlokas the Rashba and the Rosh as to why either our hands move around without us knowing it during the course of the night, or because we're a new bria. But last time we were together, we talked about that there's another reason. There's a third reason. Now, as we saw, this third reason, would not necessitate a bracha on the Netilas Yadayim. But again, once we have the other two reasons, the Rosh and the Rashba's reasons, so then, again, what we focus on a lot is the minor reason. The minor reason is because of Ruach Ra. And therefore, again, just to review it, in base, again, on top of page 17, Yedaktek la'aros aleya mayim shlosh pamim. We have to be careful to wash our hands, pour water over our hands 3 times. We talked about a goy, we talked about kids, and the Machaber says, here it comes, lahaver ruach ra sheshora alehem. In order to remove the ruach ra, however you define that, which rests upon them. Now, and the people are very makpid about this, right? The ruach ra. Now, again, we talked about ruach ra before already, when we were talking about like going to a cemetery, things like that, cutting your nails, getting a haircut. There were various things that were ruach ra, certain things were nekiyos. But again, we visited ruach ra before. Now, this is going to be important because we see, for example, the Artzos HaChaim, the Malbim, brings down, I have the Artzos HaChaim. I think we mentioned it before. The Artzos HaChaim is by the Malbim. The Malbim started writing sort of like a Mishnah Berurah type of thing. I mean, not thing. But he didn't get as far as the Mishnah Berurah got. So I have a volume at home. It's very old. It must have been my father's Al Vashon. So it's very interesting also. So in the Artzos HaChaim, the Malbim says that it's very important because he says that if you wash for one thing, one ruach ra, let's say because of sleeping, it doesn't help for another ruach ra. There are different types of ruach ra, even though they all seem the same to us. He says that the ruach ra of sleeping is different than like the ruach ra of a beis hakvaros, of a cemetery, and they're different. Right, and washing, he says 3 times in the way we just mentioned, works for this ruach ra, but he says it doesn't work for a different ruach ra. So that's very interesting. Now again, not everybody brings that down. Now what's also fascinating, and I just saw this today in the Artzos HaChaim, and that is the Malbim has a whole discussion where he says that the Rambam doesn't bring down anywhere when he talks about washing in the morning. He doesn't talk about, here the Machaber, as you could see, brings it down, says the idea very clearly of Ruach Ra. Again, besides the reasons we mentioned before, the Rosh and the Rashba, we have this idea of Ruach Ra. Now, it's very interesting, the Malbim brings down, the Artzos HaChaim brings down, that he says the Rambam never brings down this concept of Ruach Ra. And he brings down others, the Rishal, others, and he says that at a certain point, the Ruach Ra ceased. It's a very interesting idea. He says, like we see this with other things also. For example, he brings two examples, and you probably heard of these. In halacha, we know there's such a thing as golui. If you leave a liquid out, not even overnight, you leave it exposed, leave a cup of water or whatever, cup of liquid out, so then you shouldn't drink from it. But let's say you left the room, you left the house, I don't know, and you come back later and the cup of water is still there, you shouldn't drink from it. Why? Because we're worried, it's brought in halacha, right? We're scared that maybe a venomous creature drank from it and an injected venom in there. So the Ramah says we're not worried about that, right? We're not worried about that because we don't have venomous things walking around. It's very interesting. Last week or the week before, my wife and I took a one-day staycation. We went up Malibu. We went to a little park there, and we went to a kosher restaurant on PCH. So anyways, we're walking around this park in Malibu, and all of a sudden there's signs, beware of rattlesnakes. I mean, like, they had general signs, but then they had like a real, like a real sign, like a sign that they just put out. So I told my wife saw right away, like I wanted to get off that path, like let's get away from there, I don't. As I say, since way back in Bracious, me and snakes and my great grandmother don't get along too well. So it's, I don't know. So so we're not worried about that again, unless you're in Malibu, right? In your house, there's I don't know. Even though it's interesting, we have black widow spiders. When I was growing up, we never had these things around here. All of a sudden, mitamo, we have black widow spiders. But even black widow spiders, right? The exterminator told me they like dark places, being left alone. They don't like come out in the middle of the house and when it's light and drink your water. They're very into solitude and dark and all this type of stuff. So we're not worried about. The other example he gives is, you probably heard of this also. Do you ever see certain people, when they give tzedakah, they won't give an even number? Especially Sfardim are very makpid on this, I think. They won't give $100. They only give 101. So there's a concept called zugos, that it's based on Gemara, that evens are not so good, right? Okay, so we're not so makpid on that, right? Chai dollar, right? The chai is a zugos, right? It's an even number, right? So we're not so makpid on it. Like I said, some people are, but in general, you see, we're not, right? Chai is a big, maybe chai is a different thing because it's chai. But, so the Malbim says that we're not so makpid on these things. So he says also ruach ra, according to the Rambam, and it seems like it comes out that way. But again, when it comes to Negev, we'll see. You have to be very. Even though like there are some kulas, this is one, but still in general we try to be very makpid about washing because of this reason. And it's interesting. I think people know. You ask people why you wash in the morning, they'll probably tell you ruach ra. They won't tell you the two major reasons: the Rosh and the Rashba. They won't say because your hands are running around, or because like you're a new bria and you have to wash like a kohen serving in the Beis Hamikdash, right? They won't say that reason. Those reasons. Okay, Gimel. Was there anything else? Right. I want to mention. I think last time we talked about the Mishnah Berurah brings down in Tess that when he's talking about washing your hands and it goes to the wrist but on you should wash out your mouth, right? It's a halacha. He says except for on a fast day. So I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but in Siman Tov Kuf Samak Zayin Siv Katan Yud Aleph, the Mishnah Berurah says there that on if it really bothers you, morning breath, and it really distresses you a lot, So then you could be lenient to wash out your mouth as long as like you lean down, make sure your mouth is down so you won't inadvertently swallow anything. I don't know, they didn't have mouthwash in those. A lot of times I think you could be more makeup with mouthwash because you don't want to swallow mouthwash, right, in general. So again, that's my own thing. And he says you can even, right, Habolang Utova coming up next Sunday. You can even do this for Tisha B'Av if it's Sar Gadol, if it really bothers you, not rinsing out your mouth in the morning. But Yom Kippur, you shouldn't rinse out your mouth even no matter what, right? Because as I mentioned, right, Yom Kippur, even though Tisha B'Av is very chomor, but still, right, Maisa, Tisha B'Av is the Rabbanan, and Yom Kippur is the Raisa. So it's a very different level. Okay, Gimel, lo yiga biyado konventil lepeh v'lo chosam v'lo oznaim v'lo einayim. That before you wash negavaser, as we call it, you shouldn't touch neither your mouth, nor your nose, nor your ears, or your eyes, and any other orifice. You should not. And the reason is, if you look in Yud Aleph, in the Mishnah Yud Aleph, before washing, so because again, this Ruach Ra, which we just spoke about, right? Any opening that Ruach Ra could cause problems with, I assume, because there's an aperture, and therefore that could be a problem. And if you look at the next one, the next Mishnah Berurah base, you shouldn't touch your eyes. You shouldn't touch your eyelids. Right? So you see this. I mean, you don't see it. I don't know, but people wipe their eyes in them, right? Right? So you say, okay, eyes, but that's not the eyes. It's the eyelids. So Teretz is that the Mishnah Berurah is saying you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. Not until you washed, at least. By the way, Orchatz Chaim also brings down that we had a discussion last week about drying your hands. Wash negavaser, you have to dry them. So he brings down from the Kubalim that you should really dry your hands, not like what we were indicating last week. Okay, Dalet. Even somebody who washed their hands, you shouldn't touch the anal area a lot. It causes problems like hemorrhoids, something like that. And also you shouldn't touch the place of hakaza. In the old days, they're doing it still in some places. I mean, like known place, bloodletting. Right? Sometimes with leeches. So you shouldn't touch that area. Because touching something a lot, touching that area a lot, hurts the wound, right? So this is an interesting thing, all of this. So again, not necessarily, or again, he's saying even without the issue of negavaser. Here we're talking about you washed. But again, you shouldn't touch certain things a lot because it messes it up health-wise. It's injurious, right? As we all know, if you have a wound, so then you shouldn't touch it that much. Let it heal. Let it heal. Okay. Hey, now this is interesting. Lo yiga begiges shechar. You shouldn't touch a vat of shechar. We usually say is beer, something like that. Because touching it a lot will mess it up. Now, the Berurah Halacha points out, here we're talking about even Rotzalomar Achar Netila. You shouldn't touch these things even if you washed. And again, the Berurah Halacha says because touching this beer, the sheikhar, messes it up. So now again, before we were talking about, in the previous halacha, about not touching certain things before Netilas Yadayim, before Negavaser. Because before Negavaser, it will, the Ruach Ra is an issue. Here we're talking about Stam. certain things you shouldn't be touching because it's not a good idea. So, for example, a wound, or certain foods, or I don't know, again, as you know, I'm not a foodie, so I don't really, but in other words, there's certain things, you should leave them alone. Physically, you should leave them alone, because if you touch them, again, nothing to do with ruach ra or, negvaz, even after you wash your hands. Right now, I don't know what. So again, here he's using the example of a gigas of sheikhar, but again, certain things you just leave them alone. Vav. Ein sarak revius l'netilas yadayim l'tefila. You don't need a revius. You don't need a revius. Excuse me. I want to mention that in the Mishnah Berurah Yudalid, the Mishnah Berurah talks about what happens if a person did touch food before they washed. Right? Remember, like before, last week we talked about, right, you have a non-Jew who's working at a Jewish restaurant, so we got to worry, right? Make sure, in other words, when they walk in, so the mashkiach have to make sure that they wash their hands negelvasser. Because, right, they're touching food, and hands have a ruach ra. So here we're talking about, before we're talking about certain foods you shouldn't touch. After, that's talking about that will mess up the food. But again, obviously, you shouldn't touch food if you didn't wash negelvasser yet, because there's ruach ra, and the ruach ra is transferable. So the issue is, what happens if a person did touch food? I don't know what the case is. I don't know. So then what do you do with the food? So the Chavetz Chaim in Yudalid says, that if a person did touch food before they wash their hands, negelvasser, in the morning, we don't prohibit the food because of this. But certainly, even though it won't aser, that doesn't mean that you have carte blanche that you could touch food before you wash negelvasser. You have to be very careful to wash first before touching food. Let's say you did touch food before you wash negelvasser, so the Mishnah Berurah says, wash it off. Pour water on it 3 times, like by your hands, and that will do it. Something that's very interesting. It says you shouldn't smoke before you wash negelvasser. Shouldn't smoke either. Now, it's very interesting, again, as I said before, that there's a whole discussion about this. Like I said, the Malbim brings down that this only works, washing only works for this type of ruach ra. It doesn't work for another ruach ra. But also the Artzos HaChaim says that washing a food 3 times only works for a dry food. Right? Let's say something touched a liquid. So what do? Now again, we're not talking about a liquid in a container. Let's say they actually touched the liquid. So then again, the ruach ra would be transferred to it. Then what do? So it seems from the Orchot Chaim you're stuck. It wouldn't work. Again, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't make such a split. He says machal, but again, it's an interesting thing that you would wash the food, and if it's a liquid, it's an issue. Okay, Rabbi, so we'll stop here for tonight. Meretz Hashem will pick this up tomorrow, Blina, at the same time, same channel. Yes,